very warm welcome, Mr. George Kolber.
Okay. Well, thank you, Blair Academy. Thanks for having me. I hope I don't disappoint you. If I do, I'll give you your money on the way out. I'm going to just tell you, it's really hard. I often talk about the Holocaust and what my family went through, and even after the Holocaust and what life was like, and usually I spend about an hour or two addressing a group about your size, even bigger. And often I find myself at Columbia University, or I find myself at the University District of Columbia, or at Monmouth University, University of South Carolina, talking about finance, investment, banking, retailing, which is really a very interesting specialty, and the future of all of these things in many conferences, and that usually takes a lot of time. I was asked specifically to also discuss a little bit about me. And the truth of the matter is I've never done that before. And I'm doing it now, making it an exception, but quite frankly, I don't like talking about me. So I don't know what the reviews are going to be. I've succeeded everywhere else, but I suspect that talking about me is contrary to something, and you'll see a little later what I mean by that. But so listen, thank you. Thanks first of all for having me. All right. Coincidentally, and this is not shameless, but I have a book coming out in about probably 6 weeks, hardcover, called Thrown Upon the World. And we got that from Goethe, the title. And I think you'll understand why we have that title for the book when you see this next little piece here. Are we doing it? Joseph and Eva Kolber lived in Vienna with their 3 children, Dolphy, Lily, and Walter. This well-to-do family successfully owned and operated a sewing factory and a retail store selling women's fashions. On March 12, 1938, under Hitler's military threat, Austria overwhelmingly welcomed the Nazis as it unified with Germany in what became known as the Anschluss. Within days, prominent Jewish leaders and businessmen were rounded up and sent to concentration camps. Joseph Kolber was also targeted, but luckily he evaded capture. The Kolbers were anxious to leave Vienna, but other countries refused to accept Jews. Desperate to escape, they discovered that Shanghai was an open city where no visa was required. Seeing no other choice, they crated their sewing equipment to start a new business. They concealed as many valuables as they could within those crates. On October 29, 1938, Joseph and his sons left Vienna for the port of Trieste, where they would board the Conte Verde for the first leg of their sea voyage. It was Eva and Lily's plan to leave on November the 11th, taking the 7,600-mile overland rail route. Joseph and his sons passed through Port Said and arrived in Bombay on November 11th, where they discovered that a pogrom against the Jews occurred throughout Germany and Austria. This pogrom would later become known as Kristallnacht. Unable to communicate, they could only hope and pray that Eva and Lily had departed and were following their original travel plan. Joseph and the boys arrived in Shanghai on November 24th, still expecting Eva and Lily would arrive shortly. But this was not to be. Just a day before they planned to leave Vienna, Eva and Lily were confronted and threatened by the Gestapo, who were seeking to find and arrest Joseph. On November 11th, Eva and Lily departed on the first leg of their journey, catching a train to Berlin to meet relatives. When they arrived, they were greeted by anti-Jewish protesters and propaganda. Days later, before Eva and Lily could enter into Poland, German border guards demanded jewelry and cash before allowing them passage to Warsaw and then Moscow. From Moscow, they took the Trans-Siberian Railway and headed east for 8 days. Then, after traveling south, on December 2nd, they arrived at the Japanese-controlled border at Manzhouli. It was here the women were stopped because of problems with their travel documents. The Japanese were confused by a prominent red J stamped on Eva and Lily's passports. They delayed the pair for 5 days before allowing them to continue their journey toward China. Eva and Lily passed through Harbin, and once again, the red J on their passports created more problems. This time they were detained by the Japanese in Mukden and imprisoned in squalid conditions for 4 nights before they were released and allowed to continue on to Dalian. Finally, Eva and Lily left the port of Dalian aboard a coastal freighter bound for Shanghai. The 7-day trip would be the last leg of their journey. The family joyfully reunited on December 27th, over a month since the men had arrived safely. The women's planned 15-day journey turned into a tumultuous 46-day ordeal. The Kolbers were among the first of 17,000 Jews who found refuge in this strange city. It was hardly the pearl of the Orient for so many Jewish refugees who barely subsisted while fighting off starvation and disease during the war. After the war, nearly every Jew left Shanghai for either the new state of Israel, the United States, Australia, or South America. Many returned to Europe and found temporary refuge in displaced persons camps. We are the grandchildren of Joseph and Eva Kolber. We were born in Vienna, and in 1952, we came to the United States under the Displaced Persons Act. As residents of Monmouth County, we are pleased to share our family's story of survival. So that is at the museum called Change at Brookdale Community College, which incorporates a Holocaust display. And my family has a display. We contributed some archival items. The only reason I say that, if you get a chance, it's a very nice museum. If you happen to be in the area, stop by. Maybe you'll learn things, and you'll see some archival items from a lot of people. That it not only covers the Holocaust, but also the Armenian genocide, and as well as the Rwandan genocide. So you might find it interesting. We talk a little bit about me. I was abandoned when I was 2. How many people were abandoned here when they were 2 years old? No? You're really disadvantaged. That was a break. Because your behavior changes, I guess, as you grow up. I grew up in a foster home, not with my brothers. We were split up. We survived fine. The foster home was wonderful. But I had to put myself through school, which I did. I went to a couple of community colleges, ultimately got a master's degree from Rutgers University in finance. And I worked pretty much since I was 7 or 8 years old, quite frankly, doing something or other. But I somehow got into the field of retailing and did a lot of turnarounds, corporate turnarounds, identifying problems. It was a great opportunity. I think all of you would have probably done the same thing if you were in my shoes. So, it's an incredible experience when you get involved in turnarounds, because you know what went wrong with the company. American Eagle Outfitters was a problem company when I took it over. And when I got involved, it had a $225 million market cap, that means value. And when I left, it was $2.25 billion. So and similarly, and it was sort of related, DSW Shoe Warehouse, anybody hear that? Or who has it? Girls haven't heard of DSW Shoe Warehouse? I did a bad job. You did hear about it, okay, yeah. But that also, we took that public. I don't know if you've heard of Body Shop of America, Body Central, that was a catalog operation. Times have changed, retailing has changed, it's not going to be the same, and I recognize that. But I worked my way up in the retail industry, then I got involved in investment banking, private equity, venture capital. It was all, every time you do something, it's a learning experience. You learn from other people's mistakes. That's really the first thing you can do. When you do a turnaround, that's exactly what you're seeing. You're seeing a compilation of mistakes that, you know what you need to do to correct these things. So, been very lucky, very fortunate in my life. Opportunities came along and I was able to take advantage of it. That's about me. And as I said, I've never said anything about me before to anybody, so you are the first. I will talk a little bit about business. We'll talk about, what is success. I'm not sure. I'd say some years ago, I said to my son, who's a lawyer by trade, I I said to him, look at Tiger Woods. You're his age. Look at you and look at him. And then he looked at me and he said, look at Bill Gates. He's your age. So you get the idea. I'm not sure what success is. What success is really is whatever makes you feel that you've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, that you set a goal for yourself and you've achieved it. And if you achieve beyond that goal, that's great. You change your goals, you start moving them forward. So always look forward, never look back, and be satisfied with your life, and I think you will find success. Here's a business lessons learned, which is what I've decided I'm going to talk about, because I really can't talk about in-depth detail in finance or retailing or anything in the time allotted, but I can talk about some lessons that I've learned throughout the years. The number one problem that people have is communications. I will tell you that miscommunications probably is the better way to put it. Lack of communication, poor communication. When you are doing something, if you've given an assignment and you don't do the assignment because you didn't understand it, chances are somebody didn't communicate that properly to you. On the other hand, maybe you didn't understand it because you didn't allow yourself to understand it. On the other hand, maybe you will be the supervisor someday and you will have to do the communicating. The key here to communications is make sure you understand who your audience is and make sure that they really walk away understanding what it is that's expected of them or what you understand is to be expected from you. Because if you do the wrong thing, it's just a total waste of time. And it could be easily avoided just by understanding what the project is right from the very beginning. Distinguish the problem from the result. Well, the problem is that he didn't have any money. No, that's not the problem. The problem is he didn't have a job, right? The result is you don't have any money. The problem is something different. Usually people confuse the problem from the result. And I would tell you, look at the result, look at the situation and decide where the problem is. It's probably deep-rooted somewhere along the line and you end up with the result. Don't look for excuses. Just don't allow excuses to get in your way. I can't tell you how many times I hear people saying, you know, I didn't do it for this reason or that reason or so forth. Unfortunately, 99% of the times, they're just excuses that don't hold any water. If you're sincere and you're earnest, you'll get the job done. Somehow you'll find a way around the problems that befall you. And you need to make sure that you just don't allow excuses to get in the way. Otherwise, you're looking for them, and I've seen that person all too often. Always deliver on your promises. Never make promises that you can't keep. Under-promise and over-deliver. Better even yet. All right? There's an exception to that rule. Unless you're a politician. All right? If you're a politician, let's be realistic, all right? You make promises that you don't deliver on. So I would tell you, if you're planning on being a politician, you might not want to pay attention to much of what I have to say tonight. It's not the idea, it's the ability to execute the idea. I mean, everybody's involved with Shark Tank these days. If we take a look at what's going on. If you take a look at Shark Tank, for example, you fill out an application. I got a great idea. People are passionate about the idea. And I've seen this over and over and over again. And they're so passionate that they don't really listen to anybody else because they're very focused on their idea and not, hey, is your idea even marketable? Don't go chasing an idea. Make sure that the idea is marketable. The Shark Tank effect is that it gets everybody thinking, and that's wonderful. During the course of the year, they get, for 1 week, 1 episode, they get 500 applications. They look at 100 applications to come up with the 4 segments that are going to be on the show, and then all those segments are edited. Now, you've seen the Shark Tank, and I guess they do about 20 weeks a year, 25 weeks a year, let's say. That's 100 episodes that you've seen, different presentations. How many of them are really on the market? So if it starts with 500, all right, and there's only a handful that have really made it to market. And by the way, I've invested in one of the things that Shark Tank paid for, and we're still waiting for it to pay off. Actually, it was the biggest amount until a couple of weeks ago that Shark Tank ever paid for an invention. So I'm not trying to dissuade you from thinking like that, because you got to have ideas. But I've seen people go broke just chasing the ideas to the exclusion of everything else in their lives. I think that what you need to do is get a good mentor. Excuse me. You should always make sure you get a good mentor whenever you're going out on something that's extraordinary. I want to remind everybody, if you didn't know, Alexander Graham Bell was not the first person to invent the telephone. But Alexander Graham Bell was the first person to make it to the patent office. And Alexander Graham Bell was able to execute on an idea and build a monumental organization in its time. So, it's not the idea. A lot of people thought about the telephone at that time. A lot of people were working on it. But it was the ability to execute that he had. And you need to understand that in order to execute, you need some level of experience and some level of people that know how to help you execute. Don't complain and don't criticize. Nobody wants to hear it. I certainly don't want to hear it. The worst thing that you can do is complain to somebody that's equal to you or subordinate to you because they can't do anything about your complaining. So then you become a complainer. So don't criticize people, because what's the point, all right? Well, let people judge for themselves the person. You don't have to help people judge. You judge for yourself, let other people judge for themselves. So don't complain, don't become a complainer, and just don't criticize. Check your ego. I walked in here, I saw a sign, Pride. What was that sign that we saw? It said Pride on the wall. Buck in your pride. I guess I saw that on. There's a difference between pride and ego. I know pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. I don't believe it. I think it's good to have pride. I think that pride in what you're doing, pride in your product, pride in your work, pride in getting A's, pride in figuring out what college you're going to or university, and I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But the ego is different. You've made it about you rather than your accomplishments. And it is not, in my view, there's an exception to this as well. You need to check your ego. Make it about the team, make it about your product, make it about your environment, make it about the school, okay? But don't make it about you. The exception is unless you're a politician. Because politicians, it is all about them. And that's what they have to sell. And so if you're going to be a politician, it's okay to have a big ego. Be ethical. I teach ethics, or should I say lecture, I don't teach it. I lecture from time to time on ethics. I've become familiar with something that's known as Sarbanes-Oxley, which happened in a time. Sarbanes-Oxley is a way to conduct business more ethically. Based on your moral compass, it's different. Ethics is different from person to person. There's very little that is black and white. There's like this much white and this much black, and everything else is just a different shade of gray. So you have to learn to live with yourself at night when you're making a decision. The biggest problem I've always had, and I've addressed, is who's most important? Is it the customer? Is it the shareholder? Is it the employee? I can tell you, first of all, I always put myself personally behind all of those. But it's always a big argument. At Columbia University, the Graduate School of Business, we had about 300 people. We brought that up, and they probably argued amongst themselves for about 20 minutes. Who's more important? Is it the customer, the shareholder, or the employee? I will tell you that if you do the right thing, 98% of the time, all three are served. And if you're gonna do the right thing, how do I know it's the right thing? If you can sleep at night, it's probably the right thing, because you balance the decision. But at the end of the day, I'm not gonna get away with this, sometimes you have to make a decision between the three. Is it the customer? Is it the employee? Or is it the shareholder? That's another lecture. I'm not gonna tell you the answer to that, but you guys should think about it. I'm going to tell you that it's very, very, very important to give back to the community. Everybody in here should remember to give back to Blair. The wonderful thing about when you get involved in giving back, you're dealing with like-minded people, and it's really great to be friends with people that you agree with all the time. I think that you should understand that giving back to the community is an obligation that you should have. If you're more fortunate, you need to help the less fortunate. It's not only money, it's time, it's effort, it's talent. Whatever you can do to give back to the community, remember where you came from and make sure you take care of the community. I just want to thank you all. I could go on and on. I should have prepared more slides. But I will ask you, anybody that wants questions, has any questions, I'm here for you. I didn't do that before, John. Yes?
What was your first job?
Pushing carriages in the supermarket. What was my first job is the question. Pushing carriages in the supermarket was my first job when I was 14 years old. So, right, any other questions?
And what did you learn from that experience?
It was hot in the summer. All right. You know, if you want something, you have to go out and earn it. And I wanted things. I was disadvantaged. I wanted to have what the advantaged kids wanted, and I knew I had to work for it. It was the first stepping stone to something that I worked my way up to a cashier in the supermarket. So that was it. Found a lot of friends. We talk about like-minded people. Made a lot of friends that I worked with, all of whom need money, and we all had the same goals in mind, getting ourselves into college and going on the next step. Never really ever considered going away to school. In fact, I didn't even know at the time people did go away to school. So, but that's what you did. And I would tell you, everybody here, you know, I just say, I'm fortunate because you folks won't have the opportunity that I had because you didn't have the situation that I had. But I'm confident it's in everybody here that they will make the right decision regarding their future, regarding their work ethic, regarding inspiration. You'll make the right decision given the right set of circumstances. And if you don't like your circumstances, find a new set of circumstances. So, yes?
You say you were abandoned when you were a little kid. How did you find out about the story that you told us at the beginning?
Very interesting. My father actually lied and told us that my mother was dead. So he left her behind in Vienna, Austria when we grew up just outside of displaced persons camp. So he came, he abandoned us, and the only thing we knew was that on our birth certificate that we were born in Vienna, Austria. My brother happened to be in Vienna, Austria in 1972. And what happened in 1972, his wife happened to speak German, and they happened to go to the hospital that he was born in, and they happened to discover where my mother was. And then she left the hospital. She was sent back to Shanghai, and after she got back to Shanghai, they sent a letter to the hospital, and in the hospital they had to return address. So we were able to track down some uncles in Shanghai, and then we started getting the story about what happened to her. In the meantime, we ended up looking for the name Kolber in Israel because we understood that we had family in Israel, and we found an aunt, found my grandfather in 1993. He was 99 years old, and we saw him for the first time. That was Joseph, the person that you saw the picture of there. And we found him, and then we were able to start piecing things together, and it was an incredible story. And if you buy the book, then I think a lot will fit together, a lot of the pieces will fit together. But again, we were fortunate in as much as that because of our circumstances, there was a lot of records that were maintained. We were brought up in a foster home, so there were records that the foster, the highest organization, people that sponsored us, they all had records. There was a lot of paper back at the time. So we were able to do an awful lot of research, but it took an awful lot of years, an awful lot of time to get that research done. Yes? Either one.
Okay, so given what you know and all of your experiences, you can look back and give your 16-year-old self like one piece of advice, what would it be?
What one piece of advice?
Yeah.
You know, I do say, when you put your head on a pillow at night, make sure that you can sleep. You didn't do anything wrong. You were as good as you could be in your own mind. And I guess it's easy for people to pontificate and so forth, but I'm going to tell you that with the benefit of hindsight, some of the things that I point out were mistakes that I made. All right? Yeah, I probably complained to somebody. You know, I realized the importance of communications because of bad communications. You know, when I had people in the stores, you'd have to write to them on the 8th grade level, make sure that there was no misunderstanding. I would be very sneaky because you'd make sure that people sometimes wouldn't read. You'd give them a whole memorandum, it could be 2 or 3 pages or something like that. But toward the end, in the middle of the memorandum, I would say, if you got this far, you're the first person to call the office, you get $50. So this way I know the people have actually read the memo because they would call looking for their $50. But it's important that they understand, and that to me was more important than obviously the $50. Miscommunications is absolutely horrible. So, yes, you had a question, sir?
Oh yeah. How did you make a brand really famous?
Marketing. American Eagle was struggling, and what ended up happening is we ended up making, it was primarily a mail store. It primarily sold t-shirts and jeans and for men. But we discovered that a lot of women were buying t-shirts. So we changed the emphasis, and instead of being like 80-20 men's, we ended up becoming 65-35 women's. And women know how to buy. And women are very, and you get the right designers in place, and you have to pay attention to your customer all the time. Where do they shop? What magazines do they look at? What TV shows do they watch? And you make sure that you put the product out that your customers want, because that's just what it is. And that's in any business, quite frankly. Make sure you sell what your customers want. And there's been misses. Unfortunately, sometimes the designers go crazy, and you end up with some bad stuff. But overall, it's been hugely successful. I would say to you that I left the company in 2006, 12 years ago. The value of the company today is the same as the value of the company when I left in 2006. So, any other questions? Yes?
When your family was fleeing Nazi Germany, why did they split up? Why didn't they tell us?
You know, that's so we put in the book, we really didn't know exactly why. I I think Eva needed to stay behind to take care of business, but I think the real reason she didn't go was she was afraid of getting seasick. It was a big mistake on her part, because she does complain about the fact that she wishes she didn't take the rail route. But we think that that's the only reason, because they could have all gotten tickets and they could have all left at the same time. And it was not to be. Very dramatic, because in her trip, she gets stopped by the Nazis. Well, actually, before she leaves, she gets stopped by the Nazis looking for Joseph. And they are taking all the men that lived in her apartment building. They're hauling them all off. The good news for Joseph is that he got out of Dodge just early enough to avoid being arrested. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. Then she got stopped by the Nazis. They confiscated all the jewelry, because she was trying to take a lot of jewelry with her, which was common. But the Nazis decided that she couldn't take it in order to leave her continue, so she continued on. And she got stopped by the Japanese. We don't know of anybody else that really took this route. She got stopped by the Japanese, and they wouldn't let her come. And they were all very concerned about one thing. What are you going to do? Here we are in Manchuria, Manchukuo, as the Japanese called it. And what's going to happen to them? Are they going to send them back to Australia? Are they going to let them go through? Or are they going to be forced to stay in this godforsaken city for the rest of their lives? So it's pretty dramatic. That happened to them twice before they got to Shanghai. Any other questions? Yes?
Did your family seek and receive any compensation or property that they had owned in Austria?
No. And the thing is that the laws were such that they had a beautiful apartment. They were very upscale, very rich family, quite frankly. They had to leave, all the artwork had to stay on the walls. That was a law. So they had to leave the artwork behind. All the carpets, very valuable carpeting, had to stay on the floor. They're not allowed to take that. Not that they could take it anyway. And they had a very expensive piano, grand piano, that they had to leave behind as well. So it was treated as abandoned by the Nazis. So the higher rank you were in the Nazi, chances are you got the artwork, you got whatever you wanted. I'm sorry, did I answer your question properly?
Yeah, just a kind of a follow-up. Austria often claims to be a victim also. Do they have different laws regarding restitution than Germany? In other words, is
Well, and I didn't fully answer your question. Austria, after the war, a long time afterwards, they did pay some sort of a retirement benefit, if you will, to the Jews that left Austria. It was very small, it was very meager. They didn't have the kind of artwork that was that valuable that anybody could keep track of it. But whatever they got was very minimal. And I think it just started like 5 years after they returned, so it took an awful long time for them to give anybody anything. And Austria, remember, is also Germany. In the Anschluss, it's actually, Vienna was Germany at that time because it reunited. Yes?
You said Shanghai was an open city in terms of you could go there without a visa, but people didn't stay there, so they must have not been very welcoming. What was life like for this Jewish community in exile in Shanghai?
Well, I'm going to say about 12,000 of them. My family was fortunate because they had the sewing machines, and when I went there, they were able to set up a business, and they found some people to co-invest. So they were fortunate. But the vast majority lived in what was known as a Heimlich, which was a town. And I think you saw a picture of the beds and the facilities. There was a lady called Laura Margolis who took the mission to feed 12,000 meals a day. They could only have one meal. And the way she went about doing this was absolutely extraordinary. You can look her up. We did a deal with Laura Margolis because we started making clothes with our sewing machines for the Jews that were refugees. Most of the Jews that came over only had the clothes on their back, not much more than that. And, you know, they needed something else. So we actually made some clothes for the Jews that there. We actually had them make the clothes for themselves. We provided the machines. Laura Margolis is a very interesting character if you ever have the time to read, you know, if you have the inclination. Any other questions? Yes?
What was the best decision you made in your career?
I can't say, you know, I think the decisions that I made were probably the best decisions were for other people. And what I mean, the decisions that I made for business decisions where I didn't necessarily benefit, you know, I would benefit with everybody, but I didn't do the decisions for me. I did what was best for the shareholders, what was best for the company, what was best for the employees. So, for example, American Eagle going public was a critical time. The SW Shoe Warehouse going public, you know, these are great opportunities that always come along, and you have to seize on it at the moment. Very complex system when you take a company public, because the market conditions, it's sort of like the sun and the moon lining up, so you have an eclipse. You've got to make sure all the things so you can maximize the value. So I was very fortunate to have some timing on my side with those things, and know when the timing was there. So, but I would say that the best decision was taking the companies public, and in so doing, by the way, I also profited pretty handsomely. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on the future of retail?
The future of retail. So I was just explaining to somebody on the way over, to Doug Roberts, my friend. I have a Sears catalog from 1904. I love reading it. Tells you how to keep your potbelly stove black, sell satins. So it really was the Amazon of 1904. But the catalog business went away, went away, I guess, as the malls started to come into being. And the malls had its turn, killed the catalog business. Now the malls are getting killed, and online is the way it's going to be. As those of us that are familiar with malls get older and don't want to walk it anymore, and you younger folks who are probably less familiar with malls and, you know, would rather buy something online. So my view is that the malls are going to change. We're not going to have stores with a lot of merchandise and inventory. Merchandise and inventory kills you. You need labor, you need to pay shipping, you need to pay rent, you need to pay utilities. You're gonna have things called showrooms. And don't be surprised if you see what I see called Amazon Prime Showroom or Prime Stop. And essentially, for those of you who wanna see, feel, and touch the product, you'll be able to see, feel, and touch it. You'll probably scan the item and it'll be at your house the next day. So I do see that the mall shopping as we now know it is probably going to start, you know, it's already taken a tremendous toll, and it's going to happen some more at an increasing rate. Anybody else? Yes?
You said earlier that food stacks on it, you can buy it yourself. How do you recommend getting over or dealing with thinking inadequacies?
You know, as I said, pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. Just be proud of yourself, proud of your work. If you've achieved your goal, nobody can ask you more of that. You need to be satisfied with your own goal. And don't look at it as being inadequate. All right? If you haven't achieved your own goal, do whatever you can to achieve your goals. But set a goal, first of all. Know where it is. All right? And it can be big, it can be small. But it needs to be a goal. You need to make sure that you're moving in that direction. If you're moving in that direction, you're not inadequate. So don't feel inadequate. Yes? Anybody else? Okay. Yes? Up there, I'm sorry. I got something.
Someone's made a lot of character decisions. How do you advise young people what else to do with regret?
Well, I'm sorry. Could you stand up? I can't hear you.
How do you advise young people, especially as someone who's made a lot
feelings of regret, how to deal with feelings of regret. You know, I don't think it's a bad thing to feel regret. I mean, if you've made a bad decision, you've made a bad decision. Just don't dwell on it. Don't dwell. You know, listen, we're all human beings. We're gonna feel regret because we missed something. That's fine. Get over it. Move on to the next thing. It's best I can tell you because I've made some bad decisions. I've regretted, I can still remember them today. But you have to move on. Life makes you move on. And so, my point of view, get over it. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay, are we good?
One more.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I think your suggestion of getting over it is good, but there's some things we need to remember and we need to keep. And one of them is the story you told at the beginning. I mean, it is very important that we not get over what happened to the Jews. And what do you see as your place in telling a different kind of story that people haven't heard before? How do you think that helps round out that story, which we do need to keep remembering, and we do need to keep looking back?
Yeah, I don't mean, and when I say regret, and when you were talking, I assume that you're talking about a personal failure.
Yeah, no.
All right, and you know, and it happens to everybody. So in that regard, I think everybody has a duty to learn from their experiences and teach from their experiences. And you know, I had an extraordinary situation in my life. You know, hopefully, you know, you don't have the same situation, but you have a situation that you can tell the story. We've taken this seriously. We're talking to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. We're talking to the Holocaust Museum right here in Brookdale Community College. We think that it's important that people know and understand about genocide, man's inhumanity to man. You know, I think it's everybody's responsibility to take it seriously. We need to educate ourselves. It's happening today, all right? And it will continue to happen. And you know, the old saying, you know, if you ignore history, it'll repeat itself. It's a fact that that's what happens. So I agree that if you've learned something of value, that you need to share it. Anything else? Yes?
So you just talked about how genocide is still happening today. Why do you think that we're so apt to talk about getting such as the Holocaust and Jewish that criticize it, but then at the exact same time have no problem completely ignoring modern day?
Yeah. It's very interesting that it's man's inhumanity to man, and sometimes we ignore for example, in Africa, which is what you may be addressing. I don't think we should ignore it. I think that we all have a duty to address it as well. I mean, we had the Armenian genocide too, and the world ignored it. We had the Holocaust, and the world ignored it. It seems to be, that's why I say history is repeating itself. I think that we have to bring it front and center. We have to make people aware of it, and hopefully the outrage. The other thing I would say, though, is this is a world issue. It's not only an American issue. And we have to, all the countries of the world have to speak out and embrace it. The problem with, and the Japanese, what they did to the Chinese was also incredible. The attitude, the reason the Nazis picked on the Jews and the Japanese picked on the Chinese is that they looked at those people as being subhuman. When they were killing them, they said, hey, they're not humans, it's okay to kill them, all right? And that's what we have to make sure, that we look at all the people in the world as human beings that have inalienable rights. And, you know, but we can't save everybody, but we have to do the best we possibly can. Did that work? All right. Anything else, anybody? All right, yes. Up there, okay, up there, yes. Stand up though, because that glass sort of interferes with you.
When you say that
that again?
Would you say that Americans focus on consumers when it's bad, or being maybe called the American evil?
The American consumers,
Yeah. American
consumerism.
Yeah.
You know, it changed, as I said, it's the right time. My son said this to me, he said, you know, Dad, you got me retailing at the right time. And he said, you were lucky, I'm sorry. He said, you were lucky you got retailing at the right time. And I looked at him and I said, no, you were lucky I got into retailing at the right time. You know, I don't know. I mean, you know, if I were born 10 years later, I probably would have gotten involved in something else. I think retailing is changing. I mean, I'm looking at things now in retail, and I do consulting with regard to retailing. But, you know, holograms, and I have a niece that actually works on holograms. She's got a doctorate in holograms or something like that. And so you'll be able to see yourself on a table like this, 3D, spinning around in an outfit that was by American Eagle. And you'll see that at your home. So you're not going to want to go to the store. If you can see it at home, you can see, you know, why do you want to walk a mile down the mall to see what the prices are from one place to the other, which is the better deal? You know, where do I want to get my jeans? You know, at Abercrombie & Fitch, American Eagle, or the Gap, I don't know. But when it's right in front of you, there you are in Abercrombie, there you are at American Eagle, there you are at the Gap, you know, all at once, and you're looking at all this stuff. This stuff is really happening. It's happening fast. The change in technology is increasing at an increasing rate. So 5 years from now, I think if we look at the iPhone 10 years ago, and look at where the iPhone has come to today, I think that amount of progress is going to probably be made again in 5 years, not 10 years. So, you know, it's up to your imagination. Use your imagination.
Would you say consumers right now are more concerned with the experience they get on the product rather than how a product is?
The experience over the product?
Yeah.
Is that what your question is? Well, first of all, men are different than ladies. All right? And I would tell you that guys don't care that much about clothing, all right, if it's clothing. But, you know, if it's a car, if it's a gadget, guys just have, and by the way, this is not to discriminate against them, it's just in the DNA somehow. But women do care about fashion. They're you know, they pay attention much better to detail than guys do when it comes to coordinating and you know, and this is not you know, this is generally the case. This is not every single case. So I think that one of the things you have to do is you have to pay attention specifically to who your customer is. Is your customer 18 to 20? Is it 45, 60, 80? Know who your market is. Know if it's men, know if it's women. I can tell you the 65-year-old men out there really don't even like going to the mall unless shopping in the mall. And so women of that age bracket probably represent about 70 or 80% of clothing that's purchased. But know who your market is. And that goes for any kind of product you want. So, okay? I'm not sure that I really perfectly answered your question. Thank you. You got 2 thumbs up. I'll take that. Yes?
Do you think men start to care more about fashion nowadays?
No. No, I mean, are there men that care about fashion? Absolutely. Sometimes I think that I care about fashion. You know, I pay attention to it. But probably because I look at designers, I look at things because of habit more than anything else. But no, I think generally speaking, I don't think men pay much more attention to fashion, you know, than women do at all. Right? And you know, do you coordinate yourself when you get up? You just put on the shirt and pants. You take a look and see what color the shirt is, what color your shoes are, what color your belt is. Do you really think about it? No. But how about the ladies out there? You all think about it a little bit more? So. Okay. That's it. Thank you all.